Everyone having a great Ignite? Awesome. Let's have a show of hands. Whose feet hurt? Who's tired and partied too hard? Cool. So thanks for coming. I would ask you what's been the highlight of your Ignite so far, but you haven't done this session yet, so cool. I'm Gareth. You've got me for the next 75 minutes or so, and I'm an MCT, Microsoft Certified Trainer, and an MVP in Azure. And what we're going to go through is, exam prep and what you need to know for the AZ-500 exam. Who's done an exam here so far whilst they've been here? Cool. Okay, so the key takeaways of this session, this is not an exam cram session. It is I'm going to tell you what you need to go away, study, revise in order to, pass the actual AZ-500 exam. We'll have a look at the breakdown of the questions, and we'll have some example questions at the end, and give you some resources. What you will see on the slides is lots of links to resources where you can go and study. Also, don't panic, don't take a picture of every single slide. You'll fill the memory of your phone up. And you'll be able to download these decks at the end of Ignite. Cool, so first of all, we're going to have a little look at the certification overview and where the AZ-500 exam actually sits. So we've got the fundamentals level, so, basic Azure kind of architecture, how it all works, kind of the starting point, and that's a fundamentals exam. And then we've got the associate level. So this is AZ-103 for Azure administrators, developers, and this is where the AZ-500 exam sits as well. Now, I had a pre-session question from an attendee and why is there no expert level certification for security? Because actually security is everyone's responsibility, whether you're an Azure architect, whether you're an Azure administrator, whether you're an Azure DevOps engineer, we're all responsible for security, so kind of it sits within the associate level. And then we've got the expert level, so Azure Architect, like I've mentioned, and then we've also now got speciality exams, and you can see announced on Monday is a new certification for SAP on Azure, or SAP workloads on Azure. So we'll see lots more of those speciality exams hopefully appear over the next few months, but stay tuned. So what does a Azure security engineer do on a day-to-day basis? Well, like I've already said, everyone's responsible for security. What we're going to do in this session is hopefully identify some of those things we need to look at in order to be, a real in-depth security engineer to make sure what we're deploying, what workloads we're deploying on Azure, excuse me, are secure. Okay, so the learning path for the Azure Security Engineer Associate exam has 4 objective domains. And what we mean by an objective domain is kind of a grouping of specific responsibilities that we have. So we've got identity and access, we've got security operations, we've got platform protection, and data and applications. And each of those we're going to go through in this session. So how does the exam actually work? If you've never taken an exam, this just kind of gives you an insight into what to expect. You will receive 40 to 60 questions. And the exams have significantly changed over the last 18 months, as you'll see. Please answer all the questions. Yeah. In fact, in most cases, you can't actually continue until you've answered all the questions. There's no penalty for guessing. And I've sat in exams over the years, and I've been sat there looking at something, I don't even know what it is, and I've just waited for a miracle for the answer to come to me. It's not going to happen. But at least guess. Yeah, because there's a chance that you might guess correctly. Okay, so please, at least guess if you don't really know one of the answers to the questions. Personally, the way I do an exam is I go through each of the sections quite fast. I know, bang, 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 I know those answers. And I mark the ones for review that I don't know, and I can spend a little more time on that. Because what you'll notice now is exams used to be, well, they've always been kind of 2-3 hours. I used to be in there for 20 minutes. You won't be anymore. You will use almost all that time, if not all of that time. Because as you can see on the right, or on the third box, we've now got performance-based testing. This is fantastic. This means Yeah, you can go and study and understand the theory of things, but now you're presented with the Azure portal, and you're told to go and do this. So go and implement just-in-time administration. Go and implement Azure AD identity protection, risky sign-ins configuration. You've got to go and do that. Yeah? And so you'll get these series of steps. We'll see in a sec, go forward. We'll see these series of steps that you need to go and carry out. So I think it's 7, 8 different tasks you'll be presented, 1 to 2 labs which contain those tasks, and you've got to carry those out. Okay? So not only knowing the theory, but actually having to understand how to do it as well. I think that's pretty cool and really raises the value of Microsoft certification. Okay? So let's have a look at the exam and objective domains. This is quite important because those objective domains that I've spoken about earlier, you will see they're broken down into percentages. So we've got, for managing identity and access, it's 20 to 25% of the exam. For implementing the platform protection, 35 to 40%. You know, that's quite a large chunk of the exam is going to be based on the platform protection piece. We've got the managing security and operations, 15 to 20%, and then 30 to 35% for the secure data and applications. Cool. So let's have a look at what you're actually going to be asked in the section or the objective domain of managing identity and access. So we're going to be asked about Azure Active Directory workloads. We're going to be asked about configuring AD privileged identity management, and we're going to be asked about configuring Microsoft Azure Tenant security. I just want to briefly talk about how I would study for this. I would grab these objective domains, and we can see there the first one for Azure Active Directory workloads is configure an app registration. So enabling Facebook, enabling Microsoft Identities or Azure AD credentials to integrate with our applications. I would go and create an app registration. I would go to Bing or the search engine of your choice and enter that. And it will bring you to one of the most amazing resources for this exam there is on the internet. And it's called docs.microsoft.com. I promise you, that is the best resource you can use to study for this exam. But that's my top tip, okay? So let's have a look kind of what we might be asked around configuring the Azure Active Directory workloads. How many of you have used Azure AD Connect? Almost all of you, so you're all experts on this now, yeah? Well, we'll see. So, whilst you probably won't be asked to implement Azure AD Connect as part of the performance-based testing due to time, we need to understand kind of how that's implemented, where it is on-prem, whether we're going to do password authentication, whether we're going to do Active Directory Federation services, or simple password synchronization. So, you know, in fact, just go back, my apologies. So we need to install the first part of implementing Azure AD Connect is to install the required components. We then need to decide which method we're actually going to use to authenticate our users. Like I said, password hash synchronization, ADFS, or pass-through. We need to connect to our Azure Active Directory environment using our Azure AD credentials, and then authenticate, obviously. And if we've got MFA, it will prompt us for the MFA authentication. And then we need to connect our on-prem and Active Directory to Azure AD Connect as well. So it needs to be able to communicate with on-prem Active Directory in order to be able to synchronize with Azure AD. And then we have the verified domains piece. It's kind of people start to panic when they see, you can see there the Fabricum Online EU is not verified. On-prem, we don't usually have .com or .net, whatever our domain name is. We tend to have .local, .internal, .network, and therefore that domain will never be able to be verified in Azure because it is not a routable domain on the internet. Okay, so there are, on occasions, we're going to see not verified. It's nothing to panic about. Our real domain name is not what our domain name on-prem is. Then we can do domain OU and filtering. Please don't select all. You don't need the all the computers in the computers container with win hyphen something, 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 because somebody never renamed the computer, yeah? If those computers, or the objects in Active Directory that aren't applicable to be synchronized with Azure Active Directory, why would you want to clutter your new, fresh Azure Active Directory with your on-prem, maybe slightly untidy, Active Directory? So we can select a sub-OU or the organizational unit that we want. And then if we've got some kind of maybe larger enterprise environments, how we uniquely identify those users. So do we have multiple forests? Have we had mergers and acquisitions that kind of we're all connected and subdomains, et cetera? We need to identify users uniquely because no two users in Azure Active Directory can be the same. We can have the same name, but we've all got to be unique somehow. And that's usually by our user principal name or via our SMTP email address. But it has to be unique. We can also filter users based on a security group. So I've just mentioned we can filter the users based on organizational unit. But maybe we've got an IT organizational unit, and there's 1,000 IT administrators or IT staff within our organization. How can we trim that down? Maybe we're doing a proof of concept, and we only need 5 users that we're going to use Azure Active Directory. We can select on the previous screen the Azure Active Directory or on-prem Active Directory IT organizational unit. But on this screen, we can go in that organizational unit, we can go and create a security group, add those 5 users to it, and then trim it even further using this option here. So we can add that security group as well as that IT organizational unit, and that will allow us to kind of trim those additional users down. Then we select the features, whichever we're going to use. Oops. And then off we go, and Azure Active Directory will start synchronization, or the Azure Active Directory Connect, I should say. One really important thing I will say for the exam is understand, now we've got those users synchronized with Azure Active Directory, we need to understand the risky signing process and how this works. And risky signing is essentially Microsoft doing some awesome things in the background which allow us to identify potentially vulnerable or strange activity so we can stop those users from logging in. I had it literally 1 hour ago. I was remote desktoped onto a server, I was logged into something, and then outside here, I went and signed into he'd asked me to sign into OneDrive again. And he went, whoa, well, you signed in from the UK, and now you've just signed in from Orlando. That's cool. That's really cool. It does that out the box for us. So we need to understand what these options are. So, for example, users with leaked credentials. That doesn't mean Andrew has given his password to Sue on a Post-it note. What's actually happening in the background is Microsoft are scanning the web and the dark web for credentials that have been placed somewhere publicly on the internet. Okay, so they're doing that in the background for you. That's a pretty awesome feature. But please understand the risk level and the different actual signing activities that you have, okay? I guarantee that will be probably the most valuable slide for you as you enter the exam. How many of you use privileged identity management? Okay, a few. PIM is absolutely awesome. To be able to click a few buttons and secure our environment is kind of critical. Put your hand up, and let's be honest, put your hand up if you've maybe now or in the past used your domain admin access on your local machine and kind of that's your daily account. You're all liars. I've done it, I'm not going to deny. That's kind of crazy. But what we've got with Azure is Azure's not in its infancy, but we're kind of scared of it. So we say, right, what we're going to do is create some users in our Azure subscription and give them global admin access. Because if we give them global admin access, they can do anything, and then we haven't got a problem. We kind of don't treat that the same as we would on-prem. We should not be using our domain admin credentials on-prem. We shouldn't be using global administrative credentials in Azure. And there's no excuse for someone to be a global administrator or permanently. What we can do with privileged identity management is enable users to request access to resources or permissions, so global admin access or owner or contributor, or even our custom roles that we can create for a period of time. and ensure that they use multi-factor authentication as well, and make sure that they're authorized or approved by another user in order to do that. So the process is literally, I log into the Azure portal, I go and request access to the owner of a resource group, because that's my resource group that I need to do some administrative tasks on. My boss goes and receives an email, or we can enable it to receive an email, and then he or she has to go and approve that request. Once I'm finished, let's say we're only allowed 2 hours access, we can restrict that based on a time-based attribute. Once I've done, if I forget to remove myself from that privileged identity and that privileged role that I've just been given on my resource group, it will then automatically expire, and I'm going to worry about kind of any security risks. So PIM is absolutely awesome. But obviously, once we've implemented PIM, we need to monitor that because people could abuse it. Yeah? So we need to ensure that we're actually doing access reviews on our privileged identity management process as well. And we can create these access reviews, the start date, the end date, how often we want to be alerted or emailed of our access review status. So we can see here we want to do an access review on the owner of a particular resource. Then we can say, basically, once you've done this access review, what do we want to do? We can auto-apply the results that we receive to this role. So we can say, look, I want to know who keeps accessing this particular resource, let's say, within Azure. What we can do is we can say, right, scan who's an owner, how often we want this to be delivered to us, so this report, and then at the end, what the actual actions we want to carry out, okay? We don't have to do anything, but we need to ensure that we are reviewing these these privileged identity access on a regular basis. So tenant security. First thing is, kind of a question you may get is, how can we move a subscription from, or an Azure AD tenant, from one subscription to another? First question to ask is why? Because a lot of things are going to break. Things like our role-based access controls that users are assigned to, because it's a different tenant. The service and code administrator are going to change. The key vault is going to change, and the permissions to the key vault, and any managed identities are going to also be removed. So we need to identify, is that kind of the best thing to do, and understand the risks with doing so. So that's a real security problem. If we need to transfer that Azure AD tenant, maybe some developers have been creating an application, we've got some managed identities that are managing that web app. We need to ensure that now they've done that, is the right thing to do to move the Azure AD or Azure AD tenant, or do we move that web app and then kind of change the identities that it's using to actually function? We can see here the way in which we actually do that. We actually need to go to the subscription, and in the top right, you'll see you can change the directory that this is associated with. Select the we actually select the subscription that we have administrative access to, and then finally the directory will change, but with the caveat of all those things are actually going to be removed that I just mentioned. So platform protection. How do we actually protect the platform itself? In this section, you're going to be asked about virtual networks, NSGs, the new Azure, not the new Azure Firewall, application security groups. We're going to be implement host security. I kind of find that name a little strange. You're not protecting the Hyper-V host. You're protecting your VMs, which is termed host, okay? We need to look at container security, how the Azure container networking works, and how we can isolate those containers, and then also Azure resource management, and again, role-based access control kind of scenarios. So from a network security thing, or piece, we can only apply a NSG at the subnet level and at the NIC level, and we can only do one of those. So we can't have multiple NSGs. We have rules within NSGs, not multiple NSGs associated to those resources. There's some special rules to note, because we actually can break a lot of other things in Azure if we're not careful. And what I mean by that is we've got a special IP address there. We haven't got time to go through everything that IP address does, but that's kind of the management plane for Microsoft to understand if an agent's working, how it manages the resources that you've got within Azure. If we create an Azure Firewall that blocks that IP address, for example, then we're no longer going to be able to manage and use Security Center, for example, against those resources we've got deployed inside of Azure. How many people knew the outbound port of 1688 was reserved to the key management service to actually activate the virtual machine? Yeah, cool, 2, 3. So, that's pretty important, that we don't lock down our environment so much that actually some of the management features that we get with Azure are actually going to break as part of that. You need to understand routing, okay? So yes, we can spin up a virtual machine, off it goes, it has DNS hosted by Azure DNS, we can get to the internet from the gateway that Microsoft provides as part of our VNet. But actually, when we need to start doing more complex scenarios, we need to understand the user-defined routes and custom routes and system routes. And I've done a routing example as well for you at the bottom, but you really need to understand how we can say we want a network virtualization appliance that will allow us to route traffic to on-prem through a proxy, or how we say if all our traffic goes over express route and the express route maybe has an outage, how we can route our traffic then over a site-to-site VPN, okay? Those are the kind of scenarios you need to understand from a security perspective. Understand the Azure Firewall. Yeah, so everything is blocked by default, as any firewall would. But what I suggest is a little link down there. Go and deploy the Azure Firewall. Go and create some rules, and go and block access to Bing, or go log into the virtual machine then that's maybe in that resource and see the effect that has. And that's a cool little lab that you could do. Host security. This is what I just mentioned. It isn't Hyper-V. Okay, these are resources that we've got deployed within Azure. So we can configure our endpoint protection within the virtual machine to speak to the Azure Security Center. How many people have actually played with the Azure Security Center? It's a pretty cool resource in the fact that to implement something similar on-prem would take a phenomenal amount of resource and time and a spread of servers to be able to do this. And we can do this really quickly within Azure. But endpoint protection, we can have these reports directly from the Security Center, which state is the endpoint protection deployed on an Azure virtual machine, is the endpoint protection deployed on a non-Azure virtual machine, so monitoring our virtual machines on-prem. And then we can look at the health of that across the entire estate. So whether the signature, the virus definitions, or anti-malware definitions are out of date, there's no real-time protection turned on. If it's not reporting back, maybe we've blocked the management IP that we just talked about, and is in an unknown state. And then we can go and manage that for that. VM security. I think kind of as an MCT over the years, I've taught many students on Azure, and one of the things they kind of get is, in the class, we'd give the virtual machine a public IP. Yeah, we would. Is that recommended? No, but we need to get access to it. We don't have an enterprise infrastructure to be able to go and see or connect to that virtual machine, for example. But we need to make sure, we'll come back to that scenario in a second. We need to make sure that we're hardening VMs more than just worrying about the public IP. Do the right people have access to that virtual machine using role-based access control and privileged identity management that we just mentioned? Are we going to use multiple virtual machines for high availability using availability zones and availability sets? We're going to protect against malware using the endpoint protection that we just talked about. And we'll also see how we can get endpoint protection for free as part of the Azure Security Center plans. Making sure the virtual machines have updates, and we're going to use Azure Security Center to monitor that for us and implement automatic updates. And we can also have our security posture, and we'll see policies that we can apply to Azure virtual machines a little later on. Monitoring the performance for two reasons. One, is it performing as it should? But is it also over-spec'd? Have we gone and created an A15 virtual machine, which is costing us, I don't know, $1,000 a month, when actually it just needs to be an A1 machine, because it's just a little file server. So, it can be two ways that we can get that information back. And also encrypting the virtual hard drives. So yes, data is encrypted at rest in Azure, but actually the virtual machine disk itself is not going to be unless we switch that on. And the Security Center can tell us all of these things in one place. System updates. So this is slightly complex. You need to understand the process you need in order to be able to, implement the security updates on an Azure virtual machine. You need a log analytics workspace. We need an automation account, and we also need the hybrid runbook worker enabled on the virtual machine, which is by default. But the log analytics is going to create all the logs around the virtual machines being updated. Okay? Feed that information back, and then the Azure Security Center can then monitor and determine if the virtual machines are at a specific patch level that we require as an Azure security engineer. And once the VM is provisioned, Azure Security Center really relies on the Microsoft Management Agent, the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, which we can auto-deploy. That's a really useful tool. So when we first set up the Azure Security Center, we can say and set a policy that all virtual machines by default get this agent installed and start reporting back. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at implementing some Azure resource management security using leveraging the tools we've got built directly into Azure. There are lots and lots of role-based access control permissions by default. And they'll meet the majority of our requirements. However, we can create our own. And I guarantee you'll be asked about this at the exam. We can create our custom role-based access control rules, permissions at the subscription, at the resource group, and at the individual resource level if we wish. And we can also then determine who can actually modify, view, and delete that role as well. So we're creating all these. We need to think again. It's great having all these permissions, but then if we allow everybody to go and amend those permissions, it kind of exactly the same as we'd had on-prem many years ago. We've still got to monitor and manage that. And when do we use it? Well, when RBAC doesn't meet our requirements, quite simply, okay? So again, a typical question you may see in the exam is you need to create, or you need to restrict permissions to a particular resource. You need this, 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 and this as the requirements. You're like, well, the owner can't do that. The contributor can't do that. Maybe that's when you've got to go and use the role-based access control. So in the Azure Security Center, we've got these security policies. And these are recommendations for us. So the recommendations we need to determine are we monitoring the virtual machines? Have we got restarts pending? Have we got disk encryption that's not enabled? And we can create our own policies as well. We can say we need to determine if a particular event happens within a virtual machine. We, with the Azure or with the security policies, can determine that. And we can gather all that data and be fed that again back on reports, live data, integrate it with Power BI if you wish. And that will allow us to kind of keep a single pane of glass overview of our resources that are deployed directly in Azure. Who uses resource locks? Wow. Okay, little story. You'll only do this once. We had 3 subscriptions. Stupidly, I called subscription 1, the resource group 1, subscription 2, resource group 1, subscription 3, resource group 1. Gareth went and deleted the production one because it didn't have a lock. Azure resource locks allow us to protect resources from being deleted accidentally, and that's important. I remember a student a few years ago who argued with me that being able to delete a resource group, and by just putting the name in, because you have to confirm, there's no kind of delete, oops, I didn't, it asks you to confirm. But one thing I do know about IT, you only realize what you've done once you press yes. You do, yeah? And then you kind of go, oh. So yeah, Gareth went and deleted the production resource group. Gareth very quickly learned how locks work in Azure, yeah? So enabling locks on resources gives us that protection that we can't accidentally delete stuff. But back to the story, this student was arguing, well, that's stupid. Well, actually, it's only the same as going into Virtual Machine Manager or VMware and highlighting all the virtual machines, clicking delete and clicking yes. Yes, it will do it. Yeah, it's stupid. It will do whatever you're asking it to do. So please understand resource locks. They're really simple and kind of really do protect us. So we talked about policies, but we can also have a baseline. And what this means is we can say, this is what we require in Azure. We require all SQL instances that we deploy in Azure. They have encryption turned on, and we have a custom key that we keep in Key Vault. We have all virtual machines have system updates turned on. We have network security groups all have to have a particular port open, that's TCP. We need to ensure that all applications, web apps that we deploy in Azure have a web application firewall that protects them. So we create this baseline. We decide what we require in Azure, and we run that essentially against our subscription. Does that sound cool? Yeah, because we want to know if we're deploying these things, we can see Azure. As an organization, we see Azure grow internally, and then all of a sudden we kind of, developers have just done some VMs, and we've got this test environment, and actually that's pretty open to the internet. We need to determine, or need to ensure that we have this baseline applied across whatever workload and resource we deploy inside of Azure. So managing security and operations. Under this section, you're going to be asked about Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics, for example. Under the security policies piece, you'll be asked about, again, more about the Azure Security Center, just-in-time administration, and then kind of custom alerts and alerts that we want to know if we don't meet our baseline, if we are circumnavigating our security policy, we can determine that. So let's look at some of the services. This is pretty awesome. When we configure our vulnerability scanning, we can go and identify potential risks and vulnerabilities we have with the resources that we've got deployed in Azure. Now, actually, the way this works is there are two third parties that are integrated with Azure, and they're Qualsys and Rapid7. Okay, so they are essentially monitoring the vulnerabilities that are out there in the real world and integrated into Azure. So we can see on the screen some of the examples that DCOM's enabled, and maybe that's a security risk, and ActiveX controls are deployed. So vulnerability scanning allows us to really see what real-world risks we have with our resources on Azure, okay? And again, remember, it's two third parties that integrate with Azure in order to give us that functionality. Now, the Azure Security Center has two different tiers. A free tier, you can see we get the basic security policies, we get assessments and recommendations, but actually when we want to start doing the cool stuff, the same as everything in Azure, you then got to start paying for it, okay? And we have the standard tier. The standard tier allows us to do event collection and search directly from our resources in Azure, all into the Azure Security Center. Just-in-time virtual machine access. Things like the built-in threat intelligence that we've just talked about. And with the standard tier, don't forget this, in the standard tier, you get endpoint protection as part of that tier. So we can protect our virtual machines with anti-malware software for free as part of that tier. Now, just-in-time is similar to the privileged identity management. That's just-in-time as well, but just-in-time VM access enables us to restrict ports within our virtual machines, for example, for a period of time. So does port 3389 need to be open 24/7? No. So if you think from a security standpoint, I log into the Azure portal. I use privileged identity management to raise my permissions to, let's go crazy, global administrative rights for an hour. I now need to go and run a new script or deploy a new IIS configuration, web config file inside of a virtual machine. I now go into the virtual machine, and I request that the port 3389 is opened for a particular period of time. Once that time expires, that port gets closed again. Once my permissions get, or once my privileged identity management period has ended, I will then, obviously, my account is restricted back to my normal user account, okay? So working hand in hand, that gives us that additional security. And we can do it 3 ways. Make sure you understand the 3 different methods of doing so. You can do it directly within the security center. We can do it when we actually go and look at the settings of the actual virtual machines, and then we can do it programmatically as well. We can see here, we can go and add additional ports if we want to. It's kind of a bit crazy, the slide, but add a port, add TCP, UDP, the period of time that we're allowed to do that, and then we've kind of configured that. How many of you are using Azure Monitor? Cool. So Azure Monitor continues to grow with features and functionality, but we've got essentially, under the hood, it's metrics and logs. So we're analyzing our resources from a performance perspective and a security perspective. And then what do we do with those? We can do multiple things. We can have insightful insights into the performance of our application and trends, for example, when our application is busy, when it's not busy. We can have nice, pretty dashboards that we can integrate with that data. We can analyze using log analytics of the performance and increase the amount of resources that we have. Top tip as well, please understand the different tiers of services. So the free tier and the standard tier for Azure Security Center. Understand the tiers of web apps and when security around that is enabled, and I'll kind of remember that to talk about later on. But we can collect data from almost any Azure resource that we have deployed and pull that directly into the Azure Monitor. We can also do custom alerts. Now, be aware this has slightly changed recently. It was retired in June 2019. It's now kind of been replaced with Azure Sentinel, but you can still create custom alerts in Azure Sentinel if you did previously. And you can see here an example I've done is logins from the wrong subnet. So people trying to attempt to log in to a resource that we have inside of Azure from the wrong VNet, okay? We can be alerted of that if we have any kind of problems. So, securing data and applications, this is pretty important. So, let's give you kind of a typical example of a question that you may, or the kind of question that you may receive. We've got a Azure web app deployed. It was kind of in test, let's say, and development. It's gone through user acceptance testing. It was very basic. It had no kind of real data. We now need to secure that. But one of the founding pieces of implementing the web app was in test and dev, it's got to be really cheap. So we put it on a basic web app tier. We now need to implement SSL, and we now need to implement a custom domain. What does that shout to you? What do we need to do? Yeah, we do. Okay, we need to change the tier to scale that, to scale it up to make sure it actually meets those actual requirements. So that's the kind of thing you could be asked on the exam. So under this objective domain, we have security policies to manage our data. We've got security for the data infrastructure. We've got how we manage our key vault, encryption for the data at rest, security for application delivery, typically the scenario I just gave you, and then application security as well. So to create an application security baseline, the baseline that we integrate with the Azure Security Center that we've already talked about, all new web apps that are deployed in Azure are now TLS 1.2 by default. We can downgrade them if we actually need to, okay? We need to then configure our Azure services to protect those web apps as well. So back to the security center, maybe log analytics as well. And then create that security baseline to ensure that it continues to meet our requirements and meet our security policy. And this is a big piece, the key vault. So protecting our certificates and secrets directly within the key vault. And what you'll probably be asked more so is around the permissions. And the permissions essentially enable us to determine which resources can access these secrets, these certificates that we're keeping within the key vault. So make sure you understand role-based access control as part of the key vault piece and what the administrator, the contributor actually does. And then what permissions you actually need to get access from that resource as well. So really, you really need to understand the key vault and the permissions directly around the key vault as well. And they're all pretty similar. So, I have some example questions for you. You are the global administrator of your organization's Azure subscription. You need to ensure other administrators cannot accidentally delete a resource group called resource group 1. You need to go and carry out those actions in the Azure portal for resource group 1. I wonder what you would do. Resource locks. Awesome. So your organization plans to implement privileged identity management. What steps do you need to carry out in order to start the implementation of PIM? We need something first. Shout. Absolutely. We need a P2 license first. Cool. Then? Absolutely. So we need to activate PIM. So consent to PIM. Verify your identity. So it will ask you to confirm you're a human being by using the multi-factor authentication. And then we can sign up to these PIM roles. So saying, what that means is enabling the global administrator for PIM, so giving people permission to be able to request access to PIM and how long that period is going to be for, and if they actually need a reviewer in order to do that. Just one from a real-world perspective on reviewer. Don't just have one person who authorizes someone to get access, because when they go on holiday, no one's got access. Okay, so that's pretty important as well. Make sure there's multiple people. You've deployed an Azure SQL Server and database. You've installed SQL Server Management Studio on your laptop. Before you attempt to connect to the SQL Server or database, what administrative actions should you carry out? What do you have to do to get permission? They're the options. Which one of those is correct? Number 2, 50-50, phone a friend. It is, oops. So the SQL Server to integrated security. You are the Azure administrator for your organization. Your IT manager has requested that you don't want to really pester users when they are in the office to be prompted for the MFA. So when they're on the company intranet, they don't want to be prompted for MFA. What would you need to do to configure this? Here are options. Yeah, we need to create a whitelist in order to bypass that. So these are kind of things you need to be looking at and ensuring that you understand to prepare yourself ready for the exam. And create the trusted whitelist. Awesome. So how can you prepare for this? Well, digital skilling. How many people know what Microsoft Learn is? Good. Well, if you don't, it will be the best resource possible for this exam. Go to microsoft.com/learn and go and search for, in the drop-down, Azure, and then in the next drop-down where it says the role, security. And I think there's 30 or 40 different Learn modules that you can go and do, which will fully prepare you for this exam. okay? What the really cool thing about Learn is you can go in there, you can go and open up a sandboxed environment as part of these little modules that you do. You don't need an Azure subscription. One is provided for you, and you can go and carry out those tasks. So if you're not so sure about Key Vault, if you're not so sure about privileged identity management, you will find a little Learn module that you can go and study from. Events, so like attending this, for example. Classroom-based training, so instructor-led courses. There is a course directly aligned with this exam. It's a 5-day instructor-led training by MCTs. And then you become Azure certified. And like I said earlier on, really the value of certification has increased significantly from a Microsoft perspective over the past few years. And now, coupled with the fact we have performance-based testing directly in there, that really shows that you can actually carry out these job roles. My top tips. Throughout this presentation, like I said, you'll be able to download this post-event, go through each of those links. There's also a ton of hidden slides in there for additional resources that you can use, okay? When you go through these actions, I actually started my career as a Unix administrator, yeah? And then I saw a mouse. And so I wanted to click everything. But that won't work in every case. For example, when we talk about custom role-based access control, you need to create, there's no clicky in the portal. You've got to go and use a CLI or PowerShell for that. So know when you're revising and you're going through these methods or each of these objective domains, make sure you understand how to do it in the portal, if it is available in the portal, know how to do it in PowerShell, and know how to do it in the CLI. Another really cool resource for you is in docs.microsoft.com. You'll see loads of quick starts on the subjects that we've talked about today. They will show you how to do it in the portal, again, if possible, how to do it in PowerShell, how to do it in the CLI. Okay, so make sure we use all of those. Know the tiers and scalings like I've already mentioned. That is pretty critical, okay? That's pretty important that you understand that. Use the Learn Labs like we've mentioned, and I'm going to say it for about the 50th time this morning, docs.microsoft.com. It is a phenomenal resource for us. One thing I will say is don't overthink the question. That's probably been my biggest failing in exams over the years, that I sit there and start to argue with the exam machine saying, well, I wouldn't do it like that. Yeah, well, don't overthink it, okay? The exam questions have gone through a process where they are peer reviewed by multiple people, okay? It might not be the way you do it, but it is kind of the general way to do something. So don't start analyzing, well, if they've got 5,000 users and then they do this, and then, don't overthink the question. What other ways do you prepare? Well, all those objective domains that I've just talked about, they're on the exam page on the Microsoft website, okay? That kind of needs to be the main tool. You go and grab those, you put that into your search engine, so configuring app registration that we talked about earlier on, put that into your search engine, and then go through that docs article, okay? I promise you, the answer to the question is in there. So when people say, is the exam hard? Well, it's hard if you don't know the answer to the question. Yeah? And the answer to the question is on that docs website, which I've just talked about. So literally go through that, and you'll be absolutely fine. We've talked about Learn. We've talked about classroom training. If you want to do a practice test, you can go over to the hub. In the hands-on lab area, there are practice tests for each of the role-based certifications that are available as at today. Yeah? Not for AZ-500. Really? No. Okay, my bad. That is scheduled for the end of November. That is scheduled for the end of November. I knew that. Right. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, please. Can you come to the microphone? Okay, I'll repeat the question.
Are there labs in the AZ-500?
There are. So to answer that question, the question is, are there labs in the AZ-500 exam? Categorically, yes, because I've done it. Absolutely, there are labs. When I did it, there was only one. But obviously, as time goes on, that was quite a while ago, so there could now be 2. So prepare. But also, the best tool possible for exams is to do it. Now, number one, you've got performance-based testing based in the exam. So therefore, you really need to be able to do it. And by doing it, you actually learn subliminally and will know the answer to the question. Okay, so the question is, are the tasks within the exam related to each other? Generally not. Generally not. Another top tip when we're doing the performance-based testing, out of those tasks that you were given, so let's say you're given 8. Task 1 asks you, let's say, to go and create a resource lock on a resource group, let's say. Don't sit there and wait for the thing to go round. Go on to task 2, open up another tab and start the next task. We don't have to wait for deployments. I've lost enough of my life watching the bars go across screens and donuts going round and round. You don't have to wait. Okay. Okay, so the question is, what's the difference between AZ-500 and MS-500? So AZ-500 is really all security focused around Azure and its resources. MS-500 is all security related around Office 365. Yes, I know it sits on Azure. Yes, it will leverage some of the Azure engine, but it's all focused around security for Office 365 or Microsoft 365 now. Okay. So the question is, traditionally we used to have 3 hours for an exam. Do we have a separate time for the labs? Is that right? And case studies, no. That 3 hours incorporates that. So my top tip of not doing each task individually, and waiting for the deployment to succeed, just carry on to the next task. Because, like I said at the start, you will genuinely use the full amount of time for the exam. You genuinely will. Okay, I've never done it before, and I was like, ooh, this is close. Okay, and again, from a case study perspective, you have to understand that on occasions, the case study is kind of almost the life story of the company. You need to read between the lines on the information you need. What I tend to do is go and look at the questions they want and go and find the answer in the case study rather than read it. That's my personal method. Yeah, sorry, I know you've been standing a while.
That's okay. How does Microsoft update their exam with new security features that are coming out? For example, a short version now with JIT.
Yep.
How often does that happen? Like if I don't take it now, how often would I expect to go back and make sure I learn the new stuff?
Cool. So the questions are constantly reviewed for changes because we now live in a cloud world. Azure changes. Well, look at this week. There's probably been 1 million changes to it. They are constantly reviewed to make sure they're up to date. So, for example, when custom alerts was kind of removed and moved into Sentinel, that question would either be pulled or reviewed to make sure it addresses the changes. Okay, so that's that constant review and constant refresh of those questions that ensure it stays up to date. Any other questions? Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. So there are sections to the exam. Okay, so you will have maybe 20 different types of questions, so drag and drop, multiple choice. Then when you go to the next section, you've got your lab, and maybe the third section would be this, the case study kind of scenario. Any other questions?
Can you go back or you just stuck?
No, so each section, you're then stuck. Okay, yeah. Very little, given this is all security focused. Now, like I mentioned at the start, we need to, from a security perspective, it's an administrator's responsibility, it's a DevOps responsibility. So we need to ensure that in every role that we're security focused, but this is really security focused on what we should do as part of each of those roles. So very little overlap, I would say. Cool. How many people have taken an exam this week so far? Cool. You're all aware that post-event, you have a free certification that is assigned to your account that you signed up to Ignite with. Okay, so your email account you signed up to Ignite, whether that's LinkedIn, whether that's a Microsoft account, it's been associated with that. And as part of the exam registration process, it will ask you if your certification, so mine, for example, is my Outlook account, but I registered for Ignite with my corporate account. I'll log in with my Outlook account. It will ask me to verify my email that I used to sign up for Ignite. We use that process, and then we can click kind of continue through that Outlook account. So it kind of verifies and knows that free exam has been already aligned to that account. So you don't need to redeem anything. It's already on the account that you signed up to Azure for.
Is it still restricted to the same list?
All role-based access, role-based access control, I have security on the brain. All role-based certifications, yes. Yeah. Okay, that's a cool question. So are different parts of the exam weighted more than others? Yeah, well, the questions are yes, but it depends on the complexity of the task. That is kind of has an equivalent of the complexity of the questions, for example. Yeah, so a question such as, what do you use to sign into or log into Azure, a username and password, that's not gonna be 100 points, I can tell you. But something more complex is definitely going to give you a higher weighting, for example. How many tasks do you get in 8 to 12, I think. 8 to 12 is the question, is how many tasks do you get within a lab? It's 8 to 12, generally, yeah. Yeah. Do you know how long that certification exam is for? Absolutely, 180 days. Yeah, so you got 6 months of Ignite to do that exam, okay? And by then, it will all have changed. So be quick. Any other questions? I'm missing anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard in one of the other sessions we were in, they said that you had one that you could take this week.
Yep.
And then you had one that lasted 6 months.
Absolutely. So certifications at Ignite were free. All the expert kind of level and the associate level, so this and any kind of Azure architecture, for example, exams, the spaces for those exams filled up Monday. I think you can still go and do any fundamental exam. I think there's still spaces. What you can do is you can still walk up to do kind of a walk-up basis and see if there's an available slot as well. But yeah, so see if there's space. Absolutely. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there a limit on how many questions you can mark for review, or?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. I've kind of done 10 in a row. So is there a limit on how many questions you can mark for review? Absolutely not. I've literally gone through 10. I'm not sure of any of those. Oh my God, I'm never going to pass this exam. But yeah, so you can't review between sections. So if you go through so section 1 is questions. You've got to review those before you move to section 2. And I have to say time management is critical in the exam now. Yeah, so if you spend 2 hours on the first section of questions, you're probably not going to be able to complete that exam.
How do you know the section's about to end?
So let's say, section 1, you will say you've got 22 questions. You know there's more to come. Yep, so it'll say you're on question 1 of 22 questions. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
In the sections, they usually throw out labs first, questions, case studies.
Okay, that's a cool question. How will it be questions first? Will it be the lab first, or will it be the case study first? In all honesty, what usually happens is when you launch your exam, there's actually resources being deployed for you, ready for your lab. So you'll probably get questions or case study first, lab in the middle, and then the case study maybe at the end, or the questions at the end. And the reason for that is it has to provision, and then you have to be marked. And so it'll use a template or PowerShell script against that resource that you've been configuring or deploying to assess the score at the end of your exam. So it's kind of strategically placed in the middle to ensure that you kind of get your results in a timely fashion, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, the practice exams are available here at Ignite. What do you do after Ignite? Unfortunately, they are free here. If you want to practice exam at home, you can, as part of your exam registration process, you can add exam prep from MeasureUp as part of that process, or go to the MeasureUp website, which is Microsoft's official practice exam practice provider, and purchase them from there. You do have to pay, though. You do have to pay, of course, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there will definitely be questions on containers around, especially networking, anything security related from Kubernetes or Azure container instances, for example. Yeah, absolutely. So there will be questions on containers and the security around containers. Yeah.
How do we get a copy of the slides?
The copy of the slides will be available when, I think it's tomorrow, you'll be able to log, at the end of Ignite anyway, you'll be able to log into Ignite, the Ignite portal, and you'll be able to download the sessions. And the sessions are recorded as well. Forever?
Like, can you access them forever?
Well, you can still, so put it this way, you can still get Ignite 2018 on YouTube. So yeah, so they'll be able to access them for some time, I would expect. Or until YouTube fills up. Because it's probably not on Azure. Okay, if there's no more questions, I'm hanging around, so please feel free to come and shout. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.